Sometimes the strongest legs in the room belong to someone who hasn't walked in years. The therapy center smelled faintly of antiseptic and polished wood, the kind of place where hope was measured in inches and patience in months. Sunlight filtered through tall windows onto smooth floors that reflected rows of expensive rehabilitation equipment, machines designed by engineers, approved by doctors, and purchased by people who believed money could solve almost anything. On a quiet Tuesday morning in late October, a black SUV pulled slowly into the circular driveway outside the building. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door with careful precision. Inside sat a young girl in a wheelchair, wrapped in a pale blue blanket even though the day was mild, about 65 degrees. Her name was Lily Langford, 10 years old, with soft brown hair tied in a loose ponytail and eyes that carried the heavy stillness of someone who had already heard too many adults say the words, "We're not sure." Standing beside her was her mother, Victoria Langford, a woman whose name appeared on magazine covers and financial networks more often than she appeared at home. Victoria owned companies that built skyscrapers, funded technology startups, and employed thousands of people across the country, but none of that power mattered in this moment as she gently adjusted the blanket over her daughter's legs. Those legs had not moved properly in nearly 2 years since a devastating accident changed the rhythm of their lives. Doctors across 3 states had studied scans, ordered tests, and recommended therapies that cost more than most families earned in a decade. Some promised progress. Some offered cautious optimism. But recently the conversations had grown quieter, the hopeful words replaced with softer ones like adaptation and long-term care. Inside the building, staff members moved through their routines with professional calm. A therapist wheeled a rack of resistance bands past the front desk. A nurse reviewed patient charts on a tablet. And near the far hallway, a man in a simple gray maintenance uniform pushed a mop slowly across the floor. His name tag read Daniel Carter. Most people in the building knew him only as the janitor who worked the early shift, the quiet single dad who kept the floors spotless and rarely spoke unless someone greeted him first. Daniel moved carefully, steady, and unhurried, the way someone does when they have learned. That silence often reveals more than noise. As the glass door slid open and Lily's wheelchair rolled inside, Daniel glanced up for only a moment before returning to his work. But in that moment, he noticed something others did not. The way the girl's shoulders leaned forward slightly, the subtle tension in her hands gripping the armrests, the tiny tremor in her posture that suggested her body hadn't forgotten everything. Lily stared across the bright therapy room at parallel bars mounted between padded platforms. Children sometimes learn to walk there again, inch by careful inch. She had tried those bars before, many times. Each attempt ended the same way, with exhaustion, frustration, and the quiet apology of a doctor who wished he had better news. Victoria signed paperwork at the reception desk while Lily waited near the window, sunlight touching the chrome rims of her wheelchair. The room hummed with low voices and distant footsteps. Daniel wrung out his mop bucket nearby, water rippling softly. For most people in the building, Lily Langford was the daughter of a billionaire facing a tragic challenge. For Daniel Carter, she was something else entirely, a child whose body might still remember how to rise, if someone showed her the right way. The morning routine at Langford Rehabilitation Center continued with the quiet rhythm of professionals who had learned to balance science with patience. Machines hummed softly. Therapists spoke in calm, measured tones. Outside the tall windows, the autumn sun hung low in a pale blue sky, casting long beams of light across polished floors. Lily Langford sat near the parallel bars, her wheelchair angled toward the therapy mat, where other patients practiced careful movements under supervision. She watched them silently, the way children sometimes watch something they want but no longer believe belongs to them. Her hands rested on the armrests, small fingers curled slightly, as if they remembered a motion the rest of her body had forgotten. Across the room, a senior physical therapist reviewed a chart and spoke gently with Victoria Langford. The words were professional, respectful, and cautious. Progress would take time. Every patient was different. Recovery depended on many factors. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression composed but distant, the practiced calm of a woman who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts but could not negotiate with uncertainty. She thanked the therapist with quiet politeness and stepped aside, watching her daughter with a gaze that carried both determination and fear. Lily noticed the look and quickly turned her eyes back toward the floor. She had grown used to that look. Adults called it hope. Children often felt it as pressure. A soft squeak of rubber wheels echoed as another wheelchair passed through the corridor. Nearby, Daniel Carter guided his mop along the hallway edge with slow, deliberate strokes. He had already cleaned most of the morning traffic areas, but he lingered near the therapy wing longer than necessary. Not because he wanted to listen, but because he had learned that sometimes the most important moments in a building happened quietly between scheduled appointments. Daniel moved the mop bucket aside and rested the handle against the wall. For a brief second, he studied the room. Therapists focused on equipment. Nurses checked schedules. Victoria stood near the window speaking on her phone in a low voice about a meeting she would have to delay. No one watched Lily closely at that moment. The girl leaned forward slightly, staring at the parallel bars as if measuring the distance between the chair and the floor. It was only about 2 feet. Daniel had spent years measuring distances like that. 2 feet from chair to standing. 3 seconds to test balance. 1 inch of movement that meant the difference between failure and progress. Lily placed both hands on the armrests and pushed gently. The wheelchair creaked. Her shoulders lifted an inch before her arms trembled and the effort faded. She exhaled slowly and sank back into the seat. No one reacted. In a busy therapy center, small attempts were easy to miss. Daniel noticed. He noticed the angle of her spine, the hesitation in her breathing, and the quiet frustration that crossed her face before she quickly hit it. Those details were familiar to him. They were the language of recovery that textbooks did not always explain. Daniel stepped forward just long enough to adjust a trash bin near the wall, careful not to draw attention. Lily tried again, this time gripping the armrests harder. The chair shifted slightly, but her legs remained still. Her eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them again, they carried a tired patience that did not belong to someone her age. Daniel leaned the mop back against the wall and picked up the bucket. As he walked past her, he spoke in a voice calm enough that it blended with the room. "You are leaning too far forward." Lily looked up quickly, surprised that the janitor had spoken to her at all. Daniel did not stop walking. Balance starts in the shoulders, not the knees. His footsteps continued down the hallway, as if the comment meant nothing. Lily blinked once, thinking about what he had said. Around her, the therapy center continued its steady rhythm, unaware that a quiet sentence had just planted the first small seed of something none of the expensive machines had managed to start. The therapy room continued its quiet rhythm as the late morning sun drifted higher across the tall windows, warming the polished floor in long golden stripes. Lily Langford sat where she had been left, the parallel bars standing only a few feet away like silent witnesses to every attempt she had made in the past year. Around her, therapists guided patients through careful exercises. The steady sound of encouragement floated through the room. Breathe slowly. Shift your weight. Hold for 5 seconds. For most people, the words blended into the background, but for Lily they felt like reminders of a promise her body had not kept. She stared at her hands resting on the wheelchair armrests and replayed the quiet sentence the janitor had spoken minutes earlier. Balance starts in the shoulders, not the knees. It was such a simple thing to say, and yet it sounded different from the instructions she had heard from doctors and specialists. They spoke with technical precision. The janitor had spoken like someone describing a memory. Lily glanced toward the hallway where he had disappeared, half expecting him to return and explain more. But the corridor remained empty except for the distant squeak of a rolling cart. She inhaled slowly and shifted forward again in her chair. This time she did not lean too far. She straightened her shoulders the way she imagined someone balancing a stack of books might stand. Her hands pressed gently against the armrests. For a moment nothing happened. The room carried on around her, conversations blending into a soft hum. Then something small changed. Her body lifted an inch higher than before. It was barely noticeable, but Lily felt it instantly, the subtle tension in muscles that had been quiet for too long. The effort lasted only 2 seconds before her arms trembled, and she lowered herself again, breathing harder than expected. Still, the difference lingered in her mind like the first note of a song. Across the hallway, Daniel Carter paused beside a supply closet, one hand resting on the handle of his mop bucket. Through the open doorway, he could see the therapy room reflected faintly in a wall mirror. He was not watching directly. Years of discipline had taught him how to observe without appearing to observe. Lily tried again. Shoulders straight. Hands steady. The chair creaked softly as she lifted herself another inch. Daniel exhaled quietly, almost imperceptibly. That small shift was not luck. It was alignment. Inside the therapy room, a therapist finished assisting another patient and began organizing equipment near the far wall. Victoria Langford had stepped outside to answer another phone call, her voice faintly audible through the glass entrance doors. For a brief moment, Lily was alone with the parallel bars and her own determination. She looked down at her legs, wrapped in the pale blue blanket, and whispered something so softly that even she barely heard it. Just 1 second more. She pushed again. Her shoulders rose, steadier this time. The chair lifted slightly beneath her weight before settling back. It was still not standing. It was not walking, but it was closer than she had come in months. Lily's eyes widened with quiet surprise. Daniel stepped away from the closet and resumed mopping the hallway floor, the gentle swish of water against tile returning to its steady rhythm. As he passed the therapy room doorway, he spoke again without stopping, his voice calm and almost casual. Do not rush the movement. The body listens better when you are patient. Lily looked toward the doorway, but he had already continued down the hall, pushing the bucket as if the comment had been nothing more than passing advice. She turned back toward the parallel bars, heart beating a little faster now. For the first time in a long while, the distance between the chair and those metal bars did not feel impossible. It felt like something that might one day be crossed. The therapy center slowly drifted into the quiet lull that often followed the busiest part of the morning. Sunlight now filled most of the therapy room, reflecting softly from the chrome frames of the parallel bars and the polished handrails along the walls. Outside, the temperature had climbed to nearly 70 degrees, and a gentle breeze moved the trees lining the parking lot. Inside, however, time seemed to move more carefully. Lily Langford sat still in her wheelchair, her hands resting lightly on the armrests while she watched the parallel bars again. The words the janitor had spoken lingered in her mind with surprising clarity. Do not rush the movement. The body listens better when you are patient. No doctor had ever said it like that. Doctors had charts. Therapists had schedules. But that quiet voice had sounded like someone who had seen recovery happen slowly, 1 inch at a time. Lily shifted forward again. This time she adjusted her shoulders first, straightening her back exactly the way she had practiced moments earlier. She pressed her palms against the armrests and lifted carefully. The chair creaked slightly beneath her weight as her body rose a little higher than before. Her arms trembled, but her shoulders remained steady. 2 seconds passed, then 3. When she lowered herself again, she did not feel the same frustration that usually followed an attempt. Instead, she felt curiosity. Across the hallway, Daniel Carter continued guiding his mop along the tile floor in long, quiet strokes. He did not look toward the therapy room, but he could hear enough to understand what was happening. Small sounds carried differently in buildings like this. The shift of a wheelchair, the faint scrape of rubber against the floor, the change in breathing that meant someone was trying again. Daniel slowed his steps near the doorway, pretending to wipe a spot along the baseboard. Lily tried once more. Shoulders balanced. Hands steady. She lifted again. This time she held the position longer. Her heart beat faster in her chest, as if her body suddenly remembered something it had been waiting to do. When she lowered herself, she let out a quiet laugh that surprised even her. The sound was small, but it carried through the room like a spark of sunlight. Daniel heard it. Without turning, he spoke again, his voice calm and almost conversational. Progress begins the moment the mind believes it is possible. Lily looked toward the hallway, curiosity replacing the quiet sadness that had filled her expression earlier that morning. The janitor stood with his back turned, rinsing the mop in a bucket of clear water. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. Mister. Daniel paused, but did not turn around yet. Yes. How did you know that would help? He rested the mop against the wall and looked into the bucket as if considering the question carefully. Bodies remember patterns even after injuries, he said quietly. Sometimes they just need someone to remind them where balance begins. Lily studied him with growing interest. You sound like a therapist. Daniel gave a small smile that only she could see from where she sat. No, just someone who has seen people stand up again when everyone else believed they could not. Before Lily could ask another question, the glass entrance doors opened, and Victoria Langford stepped back inside, her phone lowered and her expression composed once again. She glanced across the therapy room and immediately noticed Lily leaning forward in her chair, instead of slumped back the way she usually sat. Victoria approached quickly, concern mixing with cautious hope. "Lily, are you all right?" Lily nodded slowly, still watching the janitor in the hallway. "I think I might be getting closer." Victoria followed her daughter's gaze, but by the time she looked into the corridor, Daniel had already lifted the mop bucket and continued down the hallway, leaving behind nothing except the faint reflection of sunlight on the polished floor and a quiet change in the atmosphere of the room. The late morning light continued to stretch across the therapy center as the building settled into a quieter rhythm. Most of the scheduled sessions had ended, and a calm stillness replaced the earlier movement of therapists and patients. Lily Langford remained near the parallel bars, her wheelchair positioned only a few feet away. The small progress she had felt earlier stayed with her like a secret she was not ready to lose. Her hands rested lightly on the armrests as she replayed the janitor's words again and again in her mind. Balance begins in the shoulders. Do not rush the movement. Progress begins when the mind believes it is possible. They were simple sentences, but they carried a weight that made her want to try again. Victoria Langford stood nearby speaking quietly with a therapist about future appointments, but her eyes continued drifting back to her daughter every few seconds. She noticed something different in Lily's posture. The girl no longer sat slumped in quiet defeat. She leaned forward, slightly, focused, thoughtful, as if measuring something invisible. Lily inhaled slowly and pushed against the armrests again. Her shoulders lifted, steady and deliberate. The chair creaked beneath her weight. This time she held the position longer than she had earlier. 3 seconds passed, then 4. Her arms trembled slightly, but she did not collapse back immediately. Instead, she lowered herself carefully, breathing out in a slow, controlled exhale. Victoria noticed the change and stepped closer. "Lily, sweetheart, what are you doing?" Lily looked up with a small spark in her eyes that had not been there earlier that morning. "Practicing balance." Victoria frowned slightly, confused. "Your therapist did not mention another exercise today." Lily glanced toward the hallway where Daniel had disappeared earlier. "The janitor said I was leaning wrong." Victoria followed her daughter's gaze, but saw only the empty corridor stretching past supply closets and framed certificates on the wall. "A janitor told you that?" Lily nodded. "He said balance starts in the shoulders." Victoria's expression shifted between skepticism and curiosity. She had spent years trusting specialists with advanced degrees, not maintenance staff with mop buckets. Yet the evidence was directly in front of her. Lily was trying again. At that moment, Daniel Carter returned quietly down the hallway, pushing his bucket toward the utility closet. He slowed when he saw Lily leaning forward again in her chair. Victoria noticed him this time. "Excuse me," she said politely but firmly. Daniel stopped. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria studied him for a moment. "You spoke to my daughter earlier." Daniel nodded slightly. "Just a small observation." Victoria crossed her arms, not angry but cautious. "Are you trained in physical therapy?" Daniel shook his head once. "No, ma'am." "Then why would you give advice about her movement?" Lily answered before he could speak. "Because it helped." Both adults looked at her. Lily pushed against the armrests again, lifting her shoulders carefully the way she had practiced. The chair rose slightly beneath her weight. She held the position for a moment longer than before. When she lowered herself again, she looked directly at her mother. "I got higher that time." Victoria stared in quiet surprise. She had watched months of therapy sessions and rarely seen that much control from her daughter's upper body. Daniel remained calm, his hands resting loosely on the handle of the mop bucket. "Sometimes the body just needs a reminder." "Where to begin?" he said gently. Victoria studied him again, noticing something she had not seen before. His posture was steady, confident in a quiet way that did not match the simple uniform he wore. Lily looked between them with growing determination. "Can I try the bars?" Victoria hesitated, glancing toward the therapists across the room, then back to her daughter. Daniel did not speak. He simply waited. After a moment, Victoria nodded slowly. "All right, but we do it carefully." Lily wheeled herself closer to the parallel bars, the chrome rails reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Daniel stepped back into the hallway again, as if returning to his normal routine, but he did not go far. For the first time in 2 years, Lily Langford placed both hands on the metal bars and prepared to see if her body still remembered how to rise. The therapy room grew quieter as Lily Langford placed both hands firmly around the cool metal of the parallel bars. The chrome rails reflected thin ribbons of sunlight that stretched across the polished floor, and for a moment the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Lily's wheelchair rested just behind her. Victoria Langford stood a few feet away, her posture straight but tense, as if she were trying not to interrupt the fragile moment unfolding in front of her. Across the hallway, Daniel Carter paused beside the utility closet with his mop bucket, appearing to rinse the mop head while quietly observing the reflection of the therapy room in the glass panel of the door. Lily tightened her grip on the bars. The metal felt colder than she expected, steady and unyielding beneath her fingers. Her shoulders rose slightly as she shifted her weight forward. She remembered the quiet instruction the janitor had given her earlier. Balance begins in the shoulders. She straightened her back carefully, imagining an invisible string lifting the center of her posture. Victoria watched every movement with cautious attention. "Lily, remember what the therapist told you," she said gently. "Slow movements." Lily nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the space between the bars and the floor beneath her feet. She inhaled slowly. Her arms pushed downward. Her shoulders lifted. For the first time, her body rose higher than it had in months. Her legs did not fully support her yet, but they were no longer completely still. The muscles trembled, faintly, like a memory waking from a long sleep. Lily held the position for 1 second. Then 2. Her breathing grew sharper, but she did not collapse back into the chair. Victoria's hand moved to her mouth as surprise flickered across her face. "Lily, that is more than before," she whispered. Lily lowered herself carefully back into the chair, her arms shaking slightly from the effort. But instead of frustration, a quiet smile spread across her face. "I felt it," she said softly. "My legs felt something." Victoria's eyes filled with cautious hope. Across the room, a therapist noticed the movement and approached slowly, curiosity replacing the routine calm of the room. Lily tried again. Her hands tightened on the bars. Her shoulders aligned. She lifted once more. This time she rose a fraction higher, enough that the therapist stopped mid-step, suddenly aware that something unusual was happening. Victoria turned toward the hallway where Daniel stood. "Did you tell her how to do that?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and curiosity. Daniel remained calm, resting both hands on the mop handle. "I only reminded her where balance begins," he said quietly. Victoria studied him carefully now. There was something in the way he spoke, something steady and practiced that did not belong to someone who simply cleaned floors. Lily lifted again. Her legs trembled beneath her weight, but for a brief moment, she stood partially upright between the bars. The therapist stopped completely, watching with widening eyes. Lily held the position for nearly 3 seconds before gently lowering herself again. The room had grown strangely quiet. Even the distant hum of machines seemed softer. Victoria turned fully toward Daniel now, her voice no longer skeptical, but searching. "Who are you?" Daniel looked down briefly at the polished floor before answering. "Just someone who has seen recovery take its first step many times." Victoria was about to ask another question when Lily spoke again, her voice bright with a hope that had been absent for years. "Mom, I think I can do it again." The sunlight shifted slightly through the tall windows, reflecting across the chrome rails as Lily placed her hands on the bars once more, unaware that the quiet janitor standing in the hallway was about to change the course of her recovery in a way no one in that building had expected. The therapy room fell into a strange and fragile silence as Lily Langford placed her hands around the parallel bars once again. The chrome rails were cool beneath her palms, steady and unchanging, while the sunlight pouring through the tall windows painted long lines across the polished floor. A few minutes earlier, the room had been filled with the usual quiet sounds of rehabilitation sessions, but now every small movement seemed to draw attention. A therapist stood a few steps away, watching carefully. Victoria Langford remained near her daughter with both hands clasped together, her composure beginning to crack beneath the growing weight of hope she had tried not to feel for so long. In the hallway, Daniel Carter rested his hands lightly on the mop handle beside the utility closet. He did not step forward. He did not interrupt. He simply watched through the reflection in the glass panel, calm and patient in the way someone becomes after witnessing many slow battles between determination and doubt. Lily inhaled slowly, just as she had done before. The air in the room felt warmer now, thicker somehow, as if everyone nearby had unconsciously stopped breathing at the same time. She remembered the quiet voice from earlier in the hallway. Balance begins in the shoulders. Do not rush the movement. Lily straightened her back carefully. Her shoulders aligned. She pushed downward against the bars with steady arms. This time her body rose higher than it had before. Her legs trembled beneath her weight, but they did not remain motionless. The muscles tightened slightly, as if waking from a long sleep. Lily held the position for 1 second. Then 2. The therapist nearby stopped moving entirely, eyes fixed on the girl between the bars. Victoria felt her heart pound in her chest. Lily was standing higher than she had in nearly 2 years. Her knees shook, but they did not collapse. Lily focused on the floor between the rails, concentrating on balance instead of fear. 3 seconds passed. Her breathing grew heavier, but she remained upright. Daniel watched quietly from the hallway, his expression calm but attentive. He recognized the moment instantly. It was the fragile edge where the body decided whether to retreat or to try something it had forgotten how to do. Lily shifted her weight slightly forward. Her arms tightened around the rails. 1 foot moved. It was not a full step, not even close, but it was movement. A small slide forward across the therapy mat. The therapist's hand rose instinctively toward her mouth. Victoria whispered her daughter's name softly. Lily, you are doing it. Lily heard her mother's voice, but kept her focus on the bars. Her shoulders remained steady. She shifted her weight again. This time the other foot followed slightly. The movement was small, barely a few inches, but it was unmistakable. Lily Langford had moved forward while standing. The room became completely silent. Even the hum of machines seemed to fade away. A nurse paused in the doorway. Another therapist turned from across the room. Everyone watched the small girl between the chrome rails, as if witnessing something impossible unfold in slow motion. Lily held the position for another second before carefully lowering herself back into the wheelchair. Her arms trembled from the effort, but her eyes were bright with disbelief. I moved, she whispered softly. Victoria dropped to her knees beside the chair, tears filling her eyes before she could stop them. You did more than move, sweetheart. You stood. The therapist stepped closer, still stunned by what she had seen. That is more progress than we have recorded in months. In the hallway, Daniel Carter quietly lifted the mop bucket again and began walking toward the far corridor as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside the therapy room, the atmosphere had completely changed. Because for the first time since the accident that took her ability to walk, Lily Langford had proven that her body still remembered how to begin. For several seconds the therapy room remained completely still, as if the building itself had paused to understand what had just happened. Lily Langford sat in her wheelchair with her hands still gripping the chrome bars, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. The moment replayed in her mind again and again. She had stood. Not perfectly, not strongly, but long enough for everyone in the room to see it. The therapist beside her slowly lowered the clipboard in her hands, her professional composure replaced by genuine astonishment. Across the room, 2 nurses exchanged glances, unsure whether they had truly witnessed what they thought they had seen. The quiet hum of equipment returned slowly, but the atmosphere had changed in a way that no machine or therapy schedule could explain. Victoria Langford remained kneeling beside her daughter's chair, both hands wrapped around Lily's shoulders, as if she were afraid the moment might disappear if she let go. Tears ran freely down her face now, something that rarely happened in public for a woman who had spent most of her life controlling every room she entered. Lily looked down at her legs, still wrapped in the pale blue blanket, as if expecting them to move again on their own. Mom, I really did it, she whispered. Victoria nodded quickly, her voice trembling with emotion she could no longer contain. Yes, you did, sweetheart. You stood on your own. The therapist finally stepped forward, kneeling slightly to examine Lily's posture. That was a controlled lift and weight shift, she said slowly, still processing the moment. Your legs responded to the movement. That has not happened in a very long time. Lily's eyes widened. Does that mean I can walk again? The therapist hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. It means your body still remembers how to try. And sometimes that is the first step toward everything else. Across the hallway, Daniel Carter quietly guided his mop bucket along the corridor as if he had never stopped working. His footsteps were steady, unhurried, the same calm rhythm he had carried all morning. But before he could turn the corner, Victoria's voice called out behind him. "Wait." Daniel stopped and turned slowly. Victoria stood now, wiping the last of her tears, but making no effort to hide the emotion in her voice. She walked toward him with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude that she had not expected to feel toward a man she had met only minutes earlier. "Did you know that would happen?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head once. "No, ma'am. But I believed she could find the first movement again." Victoria studied him closely now. Earlier, she had seen only a janitor with a mop bucket. Now she saw something else. His posture was steady, balanced, the quiet confidence of someone who understood the human body in ways that could not be learned from textbooks alone. "My daughter has worked with some of the best specialists in the country," she said slowly. "None of them helped her like that." Daniel rested both hands on the mop handle, his voice calm and humble. "Specialists guide the body. But sometimes, the mind needs someone to believe before the body will listen again." Victoria looked back toward the therapy room where Lily sat gripping the bars with renewed determination, still glowing with the fragile excitement of someone who had rediscovered a possibility she thought was gone forever. Victoria turned back to Daniel with a quiet realization beginning to settle in her thoughts. "Who taught you that?" she asked. Daniel paused for a brief moment, his eyes lowering slightly toward the polished floor before answering. "People who had to learn how to stand again after everything else had failed." Victoria watched him carefully as the pieces of the morning slowly began to connect in her mind. Behind her, Lily's voice carried across the therapy room again, filled with a hopeful excitement that had not been heard in that building for a long time. "Mom, I want to try one more time." And for the first time since the accident that changed their lives, Victoria Langford realized that hope had returned not through expensive machines or famous doctors, but through the quiet words of a man everyone else in the building had overlooked. The therapy room felt different now, as if the air itself carried a quiet electricity that had not existed earlier that morning. Lily Langford gripped the parallel bars again, her small hands wrapped tightly around the cool metal as the sunlight from the tall windows glimmered across the polished floor beneath her feet. Everyone in the room was watching now. The therapist stood only a few feet away, her usual clinical calm replaced by focused anticipation. Two nurses lingered near the doorway. Even a patient across the room had paused mid-exercise, sensing that something rare was unfolding. Lily looked down at the floor between the rails and inhaled slowly, steadying her breathing the way Daniel's voice had quietly guided her to do. "Balance begins in the shoulders. Do not rush the movement." She straightened her back carefully, her shoulders aligned, her arms pressed down against the bars with deliberate strength. Slowly, her body rose. Her legs trembled beneath her, but this time the shaking felt different. It was not weakness. It was effort. The muscles tightened again, responding to the signal her mind was finally sending clearly. Lily held the position longer than before. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. Victoria Langford stood just behind her with both hands hovering close, afraid to interrupt, but unable to hide the emotion filling her eyes. The therapist leaned forward slightly, studying the alignment of Lily's posture. "Good control," she whispered softly. Lily shifted her weight forward again. The movement was small, almost invisible to anyone who did not know exactly what to watch for. But Daniel Carter, standing quietly in the hallway several yards away, recognized it immediately. It was the moment the body decided to trust itself again. Lily lifted one foot. The motion was slow and uncertain, but it was real. Her sneakers slid forward across the therapy mat by nearly 3 inches before settling down again. A soft gasp escaped from one of the nurses. Lily did not hear it. She was too focused on the balance in her shoulders and the steady pressure in her arms. She shifted her weight again. The second foot followed, sliding slightly forward. It was not a full step, but it was unmistakably movement while standing. The room fell completely silent. Even the faint humming of the machines seemed to disappear. Lily stood there between the chrome rails, trembling but upright, her body doing something it had not done since the accident 2 years earlier. After a few seconds, she carefully lowered herself back into the wheelchair, her arms shaking from the effort. But the moment she settled into the seat, A wide smile spread across her face. I moved again, she whispered. Victoria could not hold back her tears any longer. She knelt beside the chair and wrapped her arms around her daughter, her voice breaking with gratitude and disbelief. You did, sweetheart. You really did. The therapist shook her head slowly, still trying to understand what she had just seen. That was not just balance. That was controlled standing movement. Lily looked up at her mother with shining eyes. Mom, I think I can learn to walk again. Victoria turned toward the hallway where Daniel Carter stood quietly beside his mop bucket. He had not stepped forward, had not asked for attention, and had not claimed any credit. He simply watched for a moment longer before gently lifting the bucket handle and turning toward the far corridor. Victoria hurried after him, her voice catching slightly as she spoke. Mr. Carter, please wait. Daniel stopped and turned calmly. Victoria looked at him with a gratitude so deep it seemed almost overwhelming. You helped my daughter do something we thought was impossible. Daniel gave a small, humble nod. She helped herself, he replied quietly. I only reminded her that the body remembers more than we think. Victoria studied him carefully, her voice softer now. You have done this before, have you not? Daniel paused for a moment before answering. Years ago, he said gently, with people who had to learn how to stand again after everything else had taken them down. Victoria glanced back toward the therapy room where Lily was already gripping the bars again, eager to try once more. When she turned back, Daniel had already begun walking down the hallway, the quiet sound of his mop bucket rolling across the tile echoing softly behind him. And for the first time since the accident changed their lives, the Langford family realized that the miracle they had been searching for had arrived in the form of a quiet man no one in the building had thought to notice.